Welcome to this tutorial on the basic template design for FLIR Thermal Studio. I am Bella with the Infrared Training Center here to help you get the most out of your reporting software. Now, Thermal Studio offers an array of features that allow you to process your infrared images, track trends in your thermal data, and create comprehensive inspection reports. Thermal Studio's strongest asset is the ability to create custom templates to easily generate professional reports. The following topics will be discussed in this module. Suggested default template parameters, the template design and editing processes, the use of core and thermal display elements in the template. Please note that the creation and editing of templates can only be accomplished using the standard and professional versions of Thermal Studio. Also, the number of templates that can be custom designed in the standard version is limited to 5. Before starting the generation of a new template or editing an existing template, it's recommended that you establish the operating environment for reports. Navigate to the Report tab in the Settings menu. One recommendation is to enable the autocorrect. This will enable the spell checker whenever the system identifies a misspelled word. Thermo Studio and its default templates are created with a default page size of A4 portrait. For North America, we would recommend using the letter portrait. Choose the font you would like to use and font size. I like to use font 14 myself and the default font color. Note that these changes when we hit the Save settings will not change the already created templates. Before designing your own template, it is suggested that you might review some of the installed templates that came with Thermal Studio. One of them may have a majority of the options that you would like in a report, and it would be a simple matter of editing that particular template. Choose a template, right-click on it, edit it, and review whether the contents of this particular analysis page are of your liking. One thing to note, as mentioned earlier, the default page size is A4. If you would decide to use this template as your sample template, first thing we recommend is to change the default back to letter and then save the template in a new name, say My Sample Template. This will then allow you to modify in this version of the template. Should you've made some mistakes and you want to revert back to the original, you would still have the original version of that template here. In this module, we're going to create a template from scratch. Select Create Template option. We now have a blank page. This is the analysis page. This analysis page is the heart of your template. And then Subsequent Report. The analysis page will be repeated for every infrared image you send to the template. The components that we'll add to our page are called elements. Add a page element. We have 2 elements that we are going to discuss in this particular module, the core and the thermal. As we can see from here, the core elements are the main components of our analysis page. When it comes to data, they'll be displayed as tables. For instance, if we select the parameters table, all the parameters for that image will be displayed. That would be emissivity, reflected temperature, distance, relative humidity, and so on and so forth. If, on the other hand, I only want a specific field of information, I can extract, say, only the distance or the relative humidity. We'll come back to that as we develop our template. When we select the core and the thermogram, we'll hide it. The thermogram, we can move it around using the mouse. We'll notice that the temperature scale is overlaid on the thermogram. I personally recommend that it is removed as it may inadvertently hide information behind the temperature scale. We can remove the temperature scale by going to the right and moving the selector switch to turn off the temperature scale. Returning back to page elements, I can now add the temperature scale and add a photo. I'm going to do both at the same time. We can now again select and move our different components or elements on the page. At this point, I would suggest that we would save the template. It is recommended that you don't attempt to design your whole report in one setting. Build it in pieces. So I'm going to save this first piece and I'm going to call it my template. But I'm going to give it a version number so I can keep track of the building blocks that I've used in establishing this template. Even though at this point our template is extremely basic, I still recommend doing a test run. So let's select the template and launch it. We'll add some images to it. These are the images that we downloaded from my camera earlier. But what I did in an offline session changed some of the color palettes of the images to demonstrate part of this process. What we can now do is review the layout. Do I like the layout? Maybe I want to have the photo stacked below the thermogram or invert the positions of each. At least I can now see what it's going to look like. I'm not going to bother saving this version of the report. It will just simply to view it. Let's continue to build our template. Select it with the leftmost button, right-click on it, and put it in edit mode. At this point, even though I've made no changes to the layout, I recommend that you save this with the new version number, particularly because of my bad habit of making changes to the template and then hitting the Save button rather than saving it with a new version overriding a working template. So here's how we created a new template. You'll notice the new version number is displayed on the screen. I'm now going to add some more elements as tables, in this case the file information and parameters. Returning to the page, I can select the table and relocate it simply by dragging it around on the screen. As we can see, each table contains a large amount of information. Some of it may not be relevant to the report or the report reader. For instance, reference temperature, external optics information in this case are not relevant to our report, so we simply select the row, right-click, and then remove the complete row. As such, the other option we have is we can rename the title. I'm going to call this image calibration parameters as an example. And the file information thermogram index is used for a different type of analysis that we're not going to conduct at this point in time. And so I'm going to remove each row that I feel aren't relevant. Max temperature and min temperature of the image may be of some interest, but we will display that in a different way. Height and width and size again probably aren't relevant, so I'm going to remove them. And now here's what we have as a new version of the template. Since I've already saved it with the name, I'm just going to overwrite that and do a save. Once again, I recommend that you do a test run and use the same images for each of your test runs so that you are confident that any errors or changes, misinformation being displayed in the report are the result of the template itself and not the images. As we can see, we can scroll down through the images in the report and see that the information is there: created date, the time, file name, and information about the different images. As before, we're not going to bother saving the report as we're still continually building on the template, so we'll just simply exit and not save any changes. The next step in the procedure in building our template is to determine how the template is going to behave when it comes to using images. Let's edit the current version. So go in, and once again, I am going to save this as a new version. So my template version 0.03. If we select the thermal image, down the right side are some options, behavioral options. Those I like to call them, and they'll have an impact on the way the template will build your report. Use color palette from the template. I recommend that so that all the images that are created in the report will be using the same color palette. So I may not want to use the grayscale color palette, for instance. I might want to use for this purpose, say the lava. So I'm now going to save the lava the lava color palette in the template. And I'm now going to turn this on, which means regardless of what color palette the original images have in the report, they will be painted with the lava color palette. Use measurements from the template. Well, obviously we don't have any measurements at the moment. This is where we now create the synergy between the camera capability and the template. Let's make the assumption that we are going to analyze temperatures between the max temperature of an area and a spot temperature. We're going to maybe subtract the spot temperature from the max temperature of the area. Our template needs to have that initially in the image so that we can then manipulate that information. So we'll go back into the editor, and I'm just going to select a spot and arbitrarily place it as well as the rectangle in the image. I've decided that I'm going to monitor the max temperature in my analysis, so I'm not going to bother with the cold spot or the average temperature in my display, and you'll notice it now only displays the max temperature of box 1. I'll save that and we'll now see that it is in the pseudo image. If I leave this unchecked, the template is going to use whatever measurement tools are embedded in the image. If there are any, let me demonstrate this. I'm going to save. With this off, I'm going to use the color palette from the template. But again, if we now recall the images, notice, as I said from before, I've purposely changed some of the color palettes in a previous session, offline session, and we can immediately see the results. All the images are now painted in the new color palette, but whatever measurement tools are on the image from the camera are now being displayed in the image and including the new positions. This one has line, for instance, from previous and two areas. I'll exit without saving this particular report. Go back into the template once again before I make any changes to the template. I'll save this with the new version number. So my template version 0.04. Let's go back to our options. Using measurements from the template are useful when the camera does not have all the particular measurement tools you plan to use in the analysis process. Or I even recommend that you turn this on when it is a qualitative assessment, which means there will be no measurement tools. This will then ensure that if, by some unfortunate coincidence, images were stored on the camera with measurement tools enabled, with the image blank of measurement tools in the template, they will be ignored when the report is generated. Use of parameters from the template. My recommendation is to have that disabled as we show here, because we're going to assume that the thermographer established the proper parameters on the camera at the time the image was captured. Use of text annotations from template. Again, they will be dependent on whether the camera has text annotation capabilities. Not all cameras have that ability. If they don't, you can create a template, as discussed in the previous module, and then use them within the report generation. Let's save this image with the template measurements enabled and have a quick look at what's happening. Since we've already saved it, let's run it again using the same images as I recommend and dropping them down and generate the report. So now whatever measurement tools were on the camera at the time images were stored, as we see in the thumbnails on the left, they will be ignored when the report is created. As we see here, and we can go to the next image. Next image, they've been arbitrarily placed where they were located in the template. Sometimes you might come across a situation that, by coincidence, the location was accurate. Let's go back to one of the other images and show that once you edit the image, you can then relocate the measurement tools and wherever is appropriate for the analysis, save it to the image in the report, and then it's updated that way. Let's go back to our template, and I'm not going to save the report at this point in time, and I'm going to save this as version 5. Let's review some other elements that we can add to the page, particularly a couple of the thermal elements. To demonstrate that, I'm first going to remove the file information table and return to the elements, go to thermal, and I'm going to add the created and the file name. I just put them here temporarily, and now I can reposition them. Since this file name is directly related to the infrared image, I'm just going to place it on top of the infrared image. I can change characteristics of any element by looking at the element table. For instance, it might be easier for me to change the height of the element to be 24, and I can make it auto width so it will adjust the width of this based on the actual name of the image. Consequently, I can do the same with the creation date and time and move it down. I can either move it down using the mouse, or if I go back to the file name for the moment, we can see that the top is at 82 points from the top of the page. I might want to align that the same place, and by coincidence I've done that. I'm going to change the height to 24, and I'll leave the width to be automatically adjusted. Of course, the date and time right now is of today's date and time because this again is a pseudo image. Having done that, I may now want to add below the infrared image the statistical information of my measurement tools. I'll go back to Add Page Element back to Core. Of course, I can add the table of measurements, and it will be dynamically adjusted based on the number of measurement tools that are in the image. Another option is to use. I'm just going to get rid of this, is an empty table. The empty table has no direct association to specific data in the image. I'm just going to realign that to here. Empty table allows us to list elements from other table types. If you remember, when we created the image parameters table, it listed all the parameters associated with the image, and we have decided to remove external optics information along with the reference temperature information. We did that selectively. I certainly can add another measurement table, and it will now display all the measurements that are of the table currently enabled in the image. But what if I want to add different information, mix and match so to speak? Well, what we can do is we'll add a row and measurement. In this case, I want the rectangular information to be displayed. First, we make sure that the label is exactly the same as what it is in the image. So in this case, uppercase B, lowercase x1, and it displays it here. Before I continue on, this example row is not required, so I'm going to remove the row. Advantage is we can still rename the table, and I'm just going to call this image information, and it's going to contain more than just measurement tool information. I'll now want to add the spot temperature, so I'm going to add a row measurement spot meter uppercase S, lowercase p1, and it's going to display that information. I now may want to determine the difference between these two values and populate the table with that as well. So if I go into the image, add a delta, the default delta is reference temperature subtracted from BX1. Reference temperature is defaulted to 20 degrees in this case, but I want the difference to be calculated between the max temperature of box 1 and the temperature of spot 1. I'm done with that, and we now get that difference. While I'm here, I just want to show you why we might want to use an empty table to populate with the measurement tool. Information is, what if our image had something that is not part of our analysis that we require? So let's arbitrarily draw the line and assume that it's quite possible some of the cameras had created a line and it's now in the image. Save this. If we return back to the report, we'll notice how this is dynamically growing based on the information that's inside the image. And it has listed all the characteristics of line 1, that being max, average, and min, because I did not choose to select specific values. Let me go back to my empty table. I'm going to add another measurement row, and this case delta and DT1. Okay, since I'm building my table with my measurements, I don't need the measurement table. I'm just going to remove it. I might now want to add text information that is allocated to the image, so I might want to add a text annotation. And again, the labeling has to be exact called location. Now the sample image does not have location in it, but this is where it would be. Let's save and run this version of the template. By the way, we can delete old copies by right-clicking and delete. We're satisfied that I don't need to go back to number 1, 2, or 3, so I can selectively remove them. I would not remove all of them. Okay, so let's go and run this one and generate the report based on these 6 images. And we now see that the information table is not populated with the data including location. This image had a text annotation called location, and it's the pump room. You'll notice that even though we have a line 1 in the image, because we have that enabled in the template, to use measurements in the template, that data is not going to get displayed here because we don't want it here. It's not required for this type of analysis. Exit. Now I'm not going to save. Go back and edit this template number 5 once again. I will create a new version. Another powerful element that can be added to the template is a text box. So we'll go down, scroll down, and go down to a text box which allows for free formatted information. Text box can. I'm just going to put this down at the bottom for a moment and change its size. Give it a recommendations, for instance. And then using the element properties, I can maybe put a border around it. Make it 1 pixel thick and give it a border color of black. So now this is what it's going to display when the report's generated. The report reviewer can now add recommendations or observations. But the text box could also be useful when associated with the thermal image elements. The text box becomes very useful when they use in conjunction with elements. For example, if we go back to the thermal element and let's talk about the temperature difference that was calculated previously. So we're going to go with measurement, and now we are going to look for delta DT1 and only the value. So what will happen is that gets displayed here. So we can now make this appear to be generated by adding a text table, not table, pardon me, text field. And what we could do is say something like this. The resultant temperature difference of, and I want to format this to fit in here. Resize this one. Move this one over. And then, maybe put this inside something called observations. But there's a resultant temperature difference of 4 degrees. Let's add another text box and we can put in something. Some observation is indicative of a minor issue. Okay. And again, reformat, we can keep adding. We can add more data if we wanted to. Now, for instance, with the line, let's move these down. And I'm just going to move this down here, down to here. Let's see, this is at 773. Let's make this one at 773. Sometimes it's easier doing it this way. The same thing with this one. Now I slide it over and I just move it over. Could add now another element in as part of the plot, and that's the profile plot. Okay, of the line and associated here. And box 1 line 1, that's what it's drawn. We can change the contents and so on and so forth. As we can see from the list of elements both in the core and the thermal, there is a lot of options that we can use to populate our template. Be selective in what you want to include. Don't overindulge yourself and add too much information that it becomes totally confusing to the report reader. Thank you very much. This is the end of module number 3.